Boston Podcast Players is supported by a grant from the Bob Jolly Charitable Trust.
Boston Podcast Players.
The story thus far.
Cast of characters.
Empress of
An
Rome.
entity or demon.
A run-of-the-mill Polish guy in his 40s.
Setting
In
a small hut
a
in the
long
city of
forgotten
Beijing.
era that lives both in the
Act
past.
1,
We
Scene 1.
create the
possible.
world with the stories we tell
Act
about
1,
ourselves.
Scene
Because
2.
Steven, he could
Act
be anywhere,
1,
right?
Scene 3.
Don't give up the ship!
Cannon fire.
Bianca pushes the stop button. The end.
Welcome everyone to Boston Podcast Players, Boston's virtual podcast stage for new works by local playwrights. I'm Greg Lamb, the host of the show, and today we have a very special episode. In the first season of the podcast, we featured the 8 playwrights of the 2016 Company 1 Play Lab unit. We were all different ages and backgrounds, but I think it's fair to say that we would all be considered early career. Few of us, to my knowledge, had mounted a full-length professional production at that time. In the second season of Boston Podcast Players, I've been featuring more established Boston playwrights with more productions and accomplishments under their belt, and that's been great. But I realized that I didn't want to abandon the perspective and needs of the early career playwright who doesn't know how to get from where they are to be produced regularly, and so I put together this 2-part special all about playwrights in their early career stage in Boston. Joining me today are 4 such early career playwrights, who I will have introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm David Fristrom. I've written 3 full-length plays, all on historic subjects. I'm fascinated by ideas and the people who are passionate about the ideas.
My ladies, I am overwhelmed. You go to such effort for me, for us, and I can little repay you for your kindness. Thanks. And thanks again, and again, thanks.
For my part, I accept your thanks, but there's no need to thank my sister, for if I know her, and I do, she does this for herself and not for you.
I am found out. 'Tis true.
For yourself?
My dear Elizabeth is quite besotted with plays and playing. If I was not well assured of the affection she bears my brother, I would believe that some handsome player had entirely stolen her heart. So eagerly does she attend the plays at court.
My heart is stolen, but no particular player catches my eye. My husband need not worry. It is the plays altogether that I adore. Fine poetic language, full of the most elegant similes and the highest wit, and sometimes the lowest, performed by expert players with fine diction and great passion, telling timeless tales of love and destiny, low comedy and high drama. When I sit at a play, I am taken wholly out of myself and experience a release of emotions, a catharsis, as Aristotle would have it.
And when I am forced to sit at a play, I see painted fellows in second-hand robes strutting on a stage and shouting lines such that no one would speak in life. I experience no release. If I want a catharsis, I'll arrange a private rendezvous with my husband.
Catherine! I'm sure Mistress Burbage is quite scandalized.
As if cheek by jowl with a troupe of players, my lady. It would take much more than that to shock me.
So you see, I have my own reasons to assist you. Anything that I can do to ensure that our greatest company of players can continue to thrive is to my own benefit.
Now we are meeting today in David's wonderful house, and I've played games here, about 15, 20 years ago, and I know that one thing you've done to try and develop your playwriting is you had stage readings you put together inside this room.
Yeah,
Can you talk about that for a bit?
All 3 of the plays I have had a group of friends get together and read them to see them up on their feet and be able to hear them myself and then get feedback, see what the audience is getting, what the audience isn't getting. And in all cases, that's then led me to go back and rewrite the play based on what I learned. And it's very valuable just having amateur performers and an audience.
Hi, my name is James Wilkinson. I've struggled over how to answer this question for the last couple of weeks, but I finally came up with an answer. I write plays that explore the psychology of characters through a surreal mix of murder, mayhem, and madness.
How much longer do you think we'll be here?
It all depends.
On what?
When you die.
Unless I get better. I could always get better. You hear me? Christ. Counting the days until...
You think that low of me?
Sometimes I wonder.
You and I, Joe. You and I. To the day I zip up that body bag and ship you out the door.
Your compassion is overwhelming.
It's doctors who heal the sick. Nurses wipe up the leftovers.
Ugh.
Now. Your final days are still far off. We'll stay ahead of the infection. You may lose a few more limbs along the way, but to be perfectly frank, no one should expect to make it through life with all of their limbs intact. The way medical science is advancing, I bet you could survive until you are no more than a head. I could keep you in a jar on the table. That's assuring, isn't it?
Spectacular.
And I know you do a couple things. You started Exiled Theater, is that right?
I'm the co-artistic director of Exiled Theater. The company has produced stuff that I've written, and I've directed for it as well.
Right, and you have a very active review blog about Fringe Theater in Boston, right?
I do. RabbitReviewsBoston.com, the title of which might change, just because I recently found out that RabbitReviews.com is a porn site.
Well, it's traffic.
So we're going to try... So if you go to it, it's got to be Rabbit Reviews Boston. If that doesn't pop up, if James Wilkinson reviews into Google, something will come up that'll bring you to whatever it's called.
I'm Jackie Martin. I have written mostly short plays. I have a couple of full lengths that I'm either finishing up or revising, but I actually really enjoy writing short plays, 1 acts, 10-minute plays. I love kind of exploring a moment in time between two people in some sort of relationship that may have a moment of explosion or misunderstanding that needs to kind of be explored. So that's mostly what I've been doing at this point.
Can't you just be happy for me?
I want to be. But you walk in here and tell me you're moving across the country and I can't do anything about it. I don't get a say?
When is the last time we made a decision together?
That's not fair.
I don't just mean because I'm out there and you're in here. I have tried. For 2 years, I have tried to involve you in whatever I could. When I ask you what to get your mom for her birthday, you have no answer. When I tell you I'm thinking about getting my MBA, you shrug. For Christ's sakes, I brought in a whole stack of paint swatches to get your opinion, and you wouldn't even look at them. You can't even make a simple decision.
Those aren't simple decisions.
It's just paint.
For his room. You were repainting his room. I know you were turning it into a man cave or something. My sister told me.
It's paint.
It's not paint. It's an eraser. I couldn't even begin. And no, I don't know what to get my mom anymore because she won't speak to me. And I can't get invested in you going back to school because I was supposed to go back to school. Those are not simple decisions. Stay near my wife or move to Texas, that's a simple decision. I have an answer for you on that one. It's stay the hell here.
Now, I know you are in the play submission game, as we shared a bill recently at an Open Theater Boston, Slam Boston, so that's where I met you and first saw your work.
Yes.
Do you want to talk about submitting or how you find places to submit to?
Absolutely. I actually just recently sort of started submitting over this past summer. I am a member of playsubmissionshelper.com, where I find a lot of those opportunities. I also sort of just stalk my friends who I know are in the game. I try when I see a festival coming up, I have a spreadsheet, I throw it in there, and then I look for it next year when they might be taking submissions again. I keep a spreadsheet of everything I've submitted and what the deadlines are, if there's a fee, things like that, so that next year I can come back to it. I really just sort of stalk online options and try to find any opportunities that I can that match up with what I'm doing.
Do you have any idea how many you've done in the past year?
I've probably submitted 15 to 20 just because I haven't been doing it that long, and I go through spurts. And out of that, I've had 4 productions.
No, I don't know if you know it, but that's a very good percentage of success.
Hi, my name is Sharisse Zeeronian, and I'm actually more of a film screenwriting person, but playwriting is kind of what led me there. When I was younger, I kind of used to do it, and then I actually went to film school because I do write scripts for film and TV. It's mostly what I do, and I have done short films, 1 feature. But the play that I guess that's why I'm here to this podcast for the play that I'm actually adapting that into a television show. I find that a lot of my work focuses on the family, but specifically between what goes on between parents and children. People are like, why do you do that? But I guess that may have something to do with the fact that I'm young, and that might be all that I know. So, yeah, and I also, short stories is something I also like to do as well. And of course, in my short stories, plays, and films, there's an undertone of things that have to do with social justice a little bit, and minorities and stuff like that.
I talked to Mrs. Wilson today.
Molly's teacher. Why, what happened?
In Stephen's hand, there are a bunch of papers stained with red ink. They are Molly's failed tests.
Spelling test. She got a 95. She didn't do badly. She got a 95.
59.
Oh, right.
Shuffles through the papers.
61, 58. Molly, who brought home hundreds on every spelling test last year. Do you have any idea why she might be doing so badly?
No.
No idea whatsoever.
Mariel shakes her head.
You know what Molly told me after I spoke to Mrs. Wilson about the tests? She said Mommy will love it. She's onto you. See, she knows that the only kids who get your attention have some sort of handicap. So here she is, acting retarded, just so you'll give her the time of day.
Stephen, I'm tired.
No, I'm tired. I'm tired.
He pauses to compose himself, frightened by how angry he is.
She's figured out what's going on. She might even find out where all of this is coming from, while putting yourself in the place of a handicapped kid is no problem for you.
No, she's not going to find out because nobody's going to tell her. Not you, not me.
You can't keep it from her forever, Mariel, because there are newspapers with your face on the front page being sold on the street. You can't hide those from her. She's going to see them, maybe even try to read bits and pieces of them herself. She reads above grade level, you know.
I know.
She could turn on the TV and land on a channel that's showing a rerun of one of your interviews where you talk about your childhood. You really believe you can shield her from that and keep making up lies and excuses about why you can't read to her at night or why I'm always the one who has to help her with her homework? How dumb do you think she is?
God, how dumb do you think I am, Stephen? You think I don't know all that? That I don't know how smart she is, how wonderful she is? Why do you think I can't stand her?
Now, prepping for this, I looked up all of your sort of background histories, and for you, I saw that you have self-published a play script. Is that right?
Yeah, that's what we're, are you talking about 1 plus 1 is 2?
Yeah, 1 plus 1 is 2.
Yes. And that is what I said I'm going to adapt into a television show. And yeah, that one has to do with disability rights in the 1960s.
So for playwrights, they're all trying to get something done. I know from being in that position that you're not sure what you're doing, what you're putting your energy into is exactly the right thing you should be doing. And so I'm trying to have this conversation as sort of a roadmap to early career playwrights to see what their options are at this point. So thank you all for joining us. I put out a call for early career playwrights, and by that I said playwrights who may have had some short plays done but haven't yet crossed the threshold of having a full-length play professionally produced by someone other than yourself. That descriptor of early career playwright would have included me up until last year. And I've asked each one of you to prepare your one burning question about the business of playwriting, and I've assembled a panel of experts, who I'll introduce shortly, who have insight to all aspects of the business in Boston to help answer your questions. So let's go around and have your one burning question about the business of playwriting.
So as I stated, I have mostly written short plays, and that's really what I enjoy. And I find that with short plays, I'm not sure what the end is, because I feel like when you're talking about a full length, you think about full stagings, world premieres, eventual publication on its own. When you're talking about short plays, you're submitting it to festivals, and there's only so many festivals that want a play that's been previously produced. And you're also probably not going to publish one on its own where it's so short. So I guess my question would be that when you've had a 10-minute or 20, 30, 40-minute one act, something like that, where you've had it produced a couple of times, you've seen some success, is there a next step when you're looking at maybe getting it published in a book of short plays or getting it to wider audiences? Are you talking about self-publication at that point? Just a website like New Play Exchange, something where more people will see it? I'm just really not sure what the next step is on that. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Kind of a similar take on that. I guess my burning question is, things that are written are not necessarily for everyone. And when you're trying to find different theaters, a full length to submit to, there are a lot of theaters out there that just don't look at new playwrights. For others, you're landing on top of a slush pile 10 miles long to be read by interns. So I guess really the question is, how do you find your tribe? How do you find those companies that are doing the type of work that you want to be doing and kind of get their attention with what you're doing?
in some ways, I consider myself almost a pre-early career playwright in that, yes, I've written some plays, but I'm mainly concentrated less on getting them produced than improving myself as a playwright. I like elements of all of them. Even I don't feel they're all quite right. I want to improve myself. And one thing I was wondering about, I know two of you are involved in developing playwrights, education of playwrights. When you're looking at early work by a playwright, obviously going to have some problems, need improvements. What facets of it do you say, oh, this person doesn't have that yet, but that's why we are going to develop them. That's how we can improve them as playwrights. And are there other elements you look at, oh, if they don't have that, we can't really do anything about it. They have to do it themselves or find something else to do.
So yours is more about how do you develop plays?
Yeah, it's what kind of things can you, dialogue, character, plot, theme, all the different things go into it. Can various MFA and other play lab and stuff help you get better at that? And are there other things that, you pretty much have to, it's innate, you pretty much have to have it. Or get it from life or something.
The question I have would be, I've had people say to me when I have approached them about, hey, would you be interested in reading this or possibly directing this? I had thought, I guess because I was such a novice at the time, and probably still now, I was saying, so would you be interested in producing this? And I didn't realize that there are many stages, because people had said, okay, well, maybe we can take this in for a table read, or maybe we can take this in for a stage reading, and I didn't really know much about what those things are. For me, it was just all or nothing, a production or nothing at all. So I'm thinking, what would be the value of having a table read? I understand it's not the same thing as having your play fully produced. What would, even if your play didn't progress to anything beyond a table read, what would that do for you? I mean, besides just getting feedback, is it more than that? Can it really elevate your play to something more than you thought it would be?
Great. I think we have a good wide range of different questions about aspects of playwriting and development in front of us. And with that, I'll bring in our panel of local theater luminaries. Patrick Gabridge.
Okay, I'm Patrick Gabridge, and I'm a playwright. I've been playwriting plays for 30 years plus. I also run a bunch of things here in Boston. I run the New England New Play Alliance. I'm also the Dramatists Guild regional rep, and I run a thing called the Playwright Submission Binge, which is a marketing online community for people. And I also run a small theater company called Plays in Place.
Okay, and Ilana?
I'm Ilana Brownstein. I'm the director of new work at Company One Theater. I formerly was the literary manager at the Huntington Theater, where I founded the Huntington Playwriting Fellows Program and Breaking Ground Festival. And I also used to run Playwrights Commons, which ran a retreat every year for playwrights, dramaturgs, and designers to go to the woods for a week and do collaborative creation outside of the pressures of the city. And mostly as a dramaturg, I have worked a lot in Boston. I work in nationally. I do a lot.
Award-winning dramaturg, I might add.
Yes. Question. Does anyone here need explained what a dramaturg does? No? Okay.
But I'll offer a short explanation for the benefit of the podcast. So if you ask 10 dramaturgs what dramaturgy is, you'll get about 17 different answers because it really depends on the project and the people involved. But the short form is the dramaturg is the person in an artistic process whose job it is to identify and open up pathways into the world of the play for all the various constituencies, whether those are the actors and designers, director, etc., who are making the play on the ground, whether that's your community, funders, stakeholders of all kinds. Mostly the dramaturg is there to help translate the story of the playwright for everybody and to help make it better. And on new work, often the dramaturg is working side by side with the playwright to help them understand what they've written and ask the most dynamic questions about what they've written in order to push it to the next level.
And finally, Kate Snodgrass.
I'm Kate Snodgrass. I'm Artistic Director of Boston Playwrights Theater, and I also am Professor of the Practice of Playwriting at Boston University. The Boston Playwrights Theater is an MFA program in playwriting along with a professional theater company. So we produce only new work, and we produce only current students of our MFA cohort and alumni of the playwriting program. So I don't get 2,000 scripts a year to read, but I do stick with our alums and current students. We also produce the Boston Theater Marathon, which is an
Speaking
annual...
of 2,000 scripts to read.
Only 400. Boston Theater Marathon, which is an annual charity event. We help support the Theater Community Benevolent Fund. We get about 400 entries a year. That stays pretty steady, and out of those we choose 50 10-minute plays to produce in one day, and each one is supported by a different theater company in the New England area. So it's a New England competition. And we also produce something we call the Massachusetts Young Playwrights Project, or New Noises. I send mentors into the high schools to teach the writing of short plays to high school students, and then we have about 25 high schools involved now. It's a 5-day festival. This year it happens late April and early May. 5 schools show up per day, and we produce 3 plays from each school with professional actors and directors. So those students get to see their plays come alive in front of their eyes. It's a gas.
I think let's start with Sharisse's question about just what does the development process do? Because I think it's the most basic question one would have. Like, what stage reading, unstage reading, table read? What are the steps from I have the script in my hand or my laptop to it's on stage at the Huntington? Do you want to try that, Ilana?
Oh gosh, me. Okay, yes, I do want to talk about that. So I was struck in the question about, I think at the end of your question, you sort of modified it as a kind of like, well, aside from feedback, what is a table read good for? And I think my counter question would be, what is your relationship to feedback? Because I think table read can be one of the most helpful pieces of a process, depending on who's in the room, what your relationship to those people might be, how well do you trust what people have to say? Is there someone there to help shape that conversation? Do you yourself feel that you have the capacity to shape that conversation? I think a lot of playwrights don't want to be in charge of that if they can help it, because it's a lot of work to both moderate a conversation and like deal with people giving you feedback, as well as hearing that feedback. So in some ways, I think a great table read is one where you've got folks in the room that you trust, whether that's sponsored by a professional theater or just, as David was saying, getting the right people in your attic rehearsal space together or in your living room. And then if you can deputize somebody to be the person who kind of like holds the room, right? And if you ahead of time know the questions that you have about your piece, are you wondering about structure? Are you wondering about dialogue? Are you just wondering whether the story lands, or is it interesting? Do people care, right? There's lots of different kinds of questions you can ask from a table read. You could also get really, really nuanced and say, okay, well, I'm trying to do this very particular thing, and I don't know if people get it. So I'm going to ask some leading questions or some opaque questions to see if I can elicit people's responses that will tell me something, right? But if you can find somebody who will be helpful to you in asking those questions, so that's not coming from you, the writer, because I think people have a different relationship to telling the writer something directly than they do to telling an intermediary, like a dramaturg or a friend who has that skill set. So for me, a table read for a playwright, if I'm working with a playwright, a table read is a great chance to just hear a first run of the thing. How does it land? What do people care about? But also to really start to figure out where people's questions are. My favorite thing to ask the audience of a reading is, what are your questions? P.S. We're not answering those questions. We just want to know what the questions are. Because you as the writer, after a read, you shouldn't feel obligated to answer questions about your play. The play should answer the questions. So if an audience has a question about, like, I didn't understand why that character jumped out the window, and if you felt as the writer that was pretty clear in the play, it's very interesting to note who in the room got it and who didn't. So the question arises, it's not your job to answer it, it's the play's job to answer it. So then what do you do with that information? I think if you have a relationship to feedback where you are able to take notes and take the stuff that's most potent and leave the rest, or put the rest aside for another day if it's not something that you really align to, then that can be a really helpful way of moving forward. But it's hard to do, especially if you're really close to a play. Then it can be very hard to hear feedback. And so you might want that other person, somebody with a dramaturgical mind or practice, to kind of take all that feedback, parse it, organize it, talk you through it, so that you don't feel like it's just on your shoulders and you're trying to work through stuff where you might feel reactive. But there's lots of different ways to go about it. That's just the opening salvo.
Right. It's very individual, yeah. I think. I mean, personally, what I will do is I will get my friends who I know are really good actors, and I will sit down with them and I'll cook them dinner or something in return, and then we'll read the play and we'll talk about it. Just talk about what they got from it. I mean, on an instinctive basis, not having read it before. That sort of spontaneous reaction is really important to me. It also depends on, is your play done? If it's done, send it out. If it's not done, if you feel like, oh boy, this part I'm not sure about, that's when you know you need a table read. And whether it's at your home or if you're, in front of a theater company, that's a great table read. That play better be really close to ready. And then that representative from the theater will say, well, I'm interested in this. And if they know you revise, if they know you're open to feedback, but still really sure about what it is you're writing, I think that's a fine line. Then that could be a very successful, quote, table read. But as Ilana says, there's levels and levels and levels, and it all sort of depends on what you want, first of all, from that table read. Do you just want your friends to read it and keep it and then revise, or do you want more? And in which case, I would start with your friends and table read and go on from there. So it's much more ready when you get more professionals in the room.
There's also something, sorry to interrupt, but there's something too that it sort of lies between these two options, which is sometimes you just need to hear your work aloud and have a set of cheerleaders.
Yeah.
To say like, yeah, we liked it.
Yeah.
Right?
It has a lot to it. Let's go.
Sometimes that can be the thing that pushes you to your next level of work.
Yeah.
Well, I also think when you're beginning, your relationship to feedback is different from after you've been doing it for a while.
Yeah.
Because when you're beginning, it's harder to know which of those comments are useful and which aren't. And so my tip is always write everything down. And then don't commit to anything. Like Ilana said, don't answer any questions, and you're just writing it down so the people can't see you saying this is a stupid idea. You just write it all down, and that way you have it and you can go back and look at it. And some things will make you mad, and you'll be like, oh. And sometimes the things that make you mad are actually valid, but you have to figure out what your distance is.
And you say, thank you. That was very
every
helpful.
time.
Every time. And writing it down is so important because it's insulting if you're just sitting there nodding. Because I know you're going to go right out of your head and you're not going to remember it.
But there's something tricky too, because I think this tip that we're hearing about, writing it down and then getting some distance, because I think in the moment we don't know what the most potent pieces of feedback are. And I've been in rooms with writers, especially early career writers, who might get some feedback from a collaborator, from a director or from an actor, or from somebody in the audience or somebody at the company. And that feedback is framed as kind of like a note rather than a question or something more open-ended, right? So sometimes that feedback gets framed as something prescriptive. And I have watched early career writers say, okay, and then they immediately go in their script and they make the change. But you don't know yet if that's the right change. All you know is that that person, who is not the writer, thought that was the solution to some problem that they spotted, but might not have been in that moment. The problem might have been in Act 1, and they're having a response to it in Act 2, right? So in some ways, you have to get really great, as Pat said, at kind of diagnosing stuff.
But so one quick thing is also, I think it's important, if you're going to solicit feedback, I think sometimes you don't want feedback. You might not be at that stage, but if you are, it's important to set the ground rules for the people that you say out loud. Like in my group, my Rhombus Playwrights group meets at Boston Playwrights Theater 2 times a month. We hire actors. We read stuff in progress all the time. And our ground rule is impressions, not suggestions. We are not interested in having people rewrite our work. And I am especially not interested in it. So I'm the most militant. I'm like, nope, we have to stop. That comment is not what we're looking for. And it's okay to be that way. I think it's actually really important to not let people start doing that. It's an impulse. Was it Sherwood Anderson, I think, said, it's like one of the most impossible impulses to resist.
It's also kind of interesting. The last play that I wrote, I was working on it kind of in the bubble of my room, just looking at my laptop. And sort of an opportunity for a stage reading arose, and I just said, the production's in a couple of months, might as well just take it. Who knows what'll happen? And the script was at this point where I'm looking at it going, well, I need this, and what could possibly change? There's something about having strangers in the room that totally changes the temperature. And we went into the reading, and it was like from the word go, the lights came up, the actor started saying the words, and all of a sudden it was just like, I have to cut that. That's got to go. Oh no, that's wrong. I don't need this. Like this can move there. So that it triggers something. Having you do need cheerleaders, but it's also cheerleaders won't always be there. You need strangers too.
I think this is actually one of the things that dramaturgs are great at doing with playwrights is cultivating that ear of like, what does a play sound like to the naive audience, right? To the audience that hasn't met the work before. And if you can find a dramaturg, and it doesn't have to be somebody who wears that hat or has the little badge that says dramaturg, it can simply be somebody who has that skill set, who can work with you to sit through the process. They can really fine tune their ear so that when you get into that room with the audience for the first time, it's not so shocking. Or if it is shocking, you got a dramaturg there who's also like really trained to be able to parse that with you. Because I think what you are saying is like one of the great truths of theater. Mm-hmm. What we experience in the rehearsal room and in the little closed space of our artist selves is so radically different once we are invited to hear it with somebody else's ears. So I love that you talked about that, because I think that is such a huge piece of writing, living in the electricity of that moment.
When it stops being theoretical.
That's right. Yeah.
That sort of is my follow-up question. I'm like, that sounds great. How do I find a dramaturg? Because, you know, so what I would say is, because when I'm trying to get feedback, I have friends that I trust, but at the same time, I always wonder, are they just telling me that they like it? Are they not really totally being honest with me? Whereas in a group of strangers, they're not going to feel bad about hurting my feelings, and there is a little bit of that imposter syndrome that goes along with, I think, being an early playwright where you're like, do I really know what I'm doing? So when you're looking for table reads or people to sort of mediate, and you don't necessarily always want to turn to just the people you know, is that a submission process too? How do you go about
No, you just hire somebody.
Okay. So you just find someone and hire them.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds simple, but in fact, it's not that hard. There are two main sources of dramaturgs in this area. Mm-hmm. One is look through the member directory for literary managers and dramaturgs of the Americas, which is an international organization with a decent-sized membership here in town. Actually, there are three sources. So that's the first source, lmda.org. Second source, there are so many colleges and universities around here that even if they don't have majors in dramaturgy, have people who are dramaturgs who are teaching that skill set. And folks are graduating out of those programs who may call themselves something else. They might be directors or actors or playwrights or producers or designers or just general like Renaissance theater people. But a lot of folks graduating out of the programs in town have dramaturgy skills. You know, specifically the BU program trains dramaturgs. There's a lot of Emerson trains dramaturgs. There's a lot of folks graduating out of the programs who are staying in town, who are young and who are looking for folks to collaborate with. Mm-hmm. And then the third source is look on New Play Exchange. NPX has a member directory where dramaturgs, so folks who are readers, classified as readers on NPX, they have a little box that they can tick that says, I'm available for hire. Mm-hmm. And you can contract people independently and offer them whatever wage you think is fair and let them decide if they'll work for that. There's also on Facebook, there's a group for early career dramaturgs, which is a national group but has a lot of New England members. And those folks are always looking for ways to flex their muscles. So
also, if you go to the Dramatists Guild, I think they still have this. They have playwrights who are, well seasoned, who will actually respond to your work on a much more distinct basis. So you have to pay for it, but it's worth it. Mm-hmm.
And also I would say Company One and Fresh Ink are both smallish to medium-sized companies that have a lot of kind of dramaturgs hovering in their orbit, thanks to Ilana.
Dramaturgs all the way down for those.
Yes, dramaturgs all the way down over there. So I think actually there's some specific ways that you can just reach out to people at those companies and say, hey, do you know anybody? Also, I think there's a New England Playwrights Facebook group.
Boston, New England Playwrights.
Yes, yeah. If you go on that group and you said, hey, I'm looking for a dramaturg, you'd probably have 10 people say, hey, I'm doing it.
So I started that group and I'll approve you, no problem. You can just go on there and put a call out and people will say.
Do you have any hints on, these are ways to get lists of possible people. How do you find the one that's going to match you? I mean, if I was looking for a director, I could look at the director's work. If I was looking for a playwright, I could read the playwright's work. How do you find the dramaturg since what they do is so important but amorphous?
I wonder if do other folks have an idea about how you would do that?
Well, I would just go onto the Boston New England Facebook group and say, hi, I'm looking for a dramaturg and I'm writing about Elizabethan theater. I'm writing about scientists in Germany in World War II, like some of your plays have done, and then someone will know someone.
Yeah. It's we're in a social business, so it's asking around, and even just all the people in this room, you could ask any of us, and we'd say, oh, you should talk to this person based on that project. There are enough connectors in this town that I could list you 5 people that if you ask those 5 people, they could point you in a direction.
So let's move to David's question, which is related about When you're trying to develop a play, what facets do development houses and opportunities look for in work?
Yeah, can I see if I can parse that question a little bit more deeply? I think what I was hearing you ask was, if I send a play somewhere, what are the qualities of an unfinished script that will pop off the page and be an open door to somebody who's reading it? And which are the things that somebody's going to be like, no, I can't work with that? Is that sort of what you're asking?
Yeah, it's sort of, you're reading it, it's not perfect. What things when it's imperfect, but that's the whole reason they should be working with us, so we can improve that. Or this imperfection, that person isn't right or isn't right for our program.
I can tell you what we look for at BU in the MFA playwriting program, and it's sort of amorphous, sort of not specific, but we look for something that should be done on the stage, and it's not a television script. It's an obvious that the playwright knows that the three-dimensional space is different. We look for rich character, and I personally look for dramatic action, which means that the playwright understands that this happened because that happened because that happened, so that there's a dramatic connection going on in front of me and not off stage. So it's a moving picture rather than a photograph. Aside from that, I'm not looking for perfect writing, because what play is? Well, I could maybe name a couple, but that's because they've been around a long time. Now, everything is up for grabs. So I'm not looking for perfect writing, but I am looking for those talents that show me that this is a person of the theater.
So I think the answer to your question is really complicated.
Yeah.
I wish there were an easy way, like a checklist, right? But I do think that every place you might send a play will have a different set of values. Right. So in some ways, you have to be thinking about what is it you are trying to achieve, and can you identify the places that you think are doing that, right? So that's step one. I can say for company one, because we are mission driven, and not every company is mission driven, okay? Almost every company has a mission because they kind of have to because of strategic plans and boards and funding and things, but not all missions are meaningful. Some missions are, our mission is to produce the best work. Super. Great, join the club, right? What does that mean to that company? No clue. So for company one, because we produce work that sits at the intersection of art and social change, we are always looking for plays that are conscious of the positionality of the playwright, the story that playwright is telling, the way that story lives on a stage, and how that story on the stage lives in community. So those things are like an interlocking weave, right? So for company one, this is reductive, okay? So super reductive. But for the most part, we don't produce a lot of plays by and about white people because everybody else does. We don't need to. Right? What we need to do is create spaces where the stories that are largely unheard and unwritten are able to find space. That does not mean that white writers and white stories don't have space in our work. It just means that that's not the thrust of what we do. And if we are doing work that is by white writers with white characters and white stories, we want it to be engaging social change in some way. We want it to be asking questions and to be pushing forward an agenda, a political agenda that aligns with the political agenda of the company. This is unique to company one. I wouldn't say that that's true of other companies because they have their own missions, right? But your question, I think, so that's like the weird specificity of like what happens when you send a play somewhere. But the other piece of your question is in fact maybe a little simpler to answer, which is, the same way that Kate says she looks for dramatic action or somebody who understands dramatic action, I am always looking for a playwright who knows their own voice, that feels confident in their voice, can deploy it, even if I don't like the story, or if I don't think I enjoy the structure or whatever of the characters. If the playwright's voice is strong and centered, I'm in. That can mean a lot of different things. I'm not super picky about the style of a play. I'm not super picky about how the characters behave. I'm not super picky about the form or like whether action leads directly to something else. I am really interested in the voice. But not everybody's different, you know what I mean? Yeah,
I sort of have a follow-up to Kate that you talked about. You're looking for people coming into your program to already have these things. Yeah. Do you have any ideas of how people who may not have those fully developed can develop them? Since your program isn't where they go for it. Is there places they can do it, or they just work on their own, find a dramaturg to work with? Yeah. Any ideas there?
Right. It's a graduate program. It's not an introductory set of courses. But writing, let's just start writing and see what happens and get somebody in the room to listen to it and, get some feedback from some people that you trust.
Let me ask, how many of the playwrights here are in a regular writing group or program of some sort?
None.
Not really.
I mean, I graduated from college last year, but I guess that sort of counted.
I keep trying to get something together and I'm having a lot of trouble. People keep saying, yes, let's do it. And then you have trouble actually making it happen. So I keep playing with joining one or another. I'm just having a hard time with the insanity of my life right now, finding something that matches what I can actually commit to.
Patrick can maybe speak to that because
Yeah.
it's so important
Yes.
to have a group that forces you to have a deadline because no way anybody's going to write unless you have a deadline.
Yeah, and I started Rhombus when I had kids who were 3 and 5, maybe. So, or however old they were. They weren't very old. For me, it was a good excuse to get out of the house twice a week, meet with playwrights who I really liked, and get to work with talented actors. And it actually was a great entry point for me in terms of meeting talented actors who will show up for $20 and read your stuff, and you build relationships over time. So that part's really important too, but also having that deadline every other week and finding a way to do it. And, there are groups that have followed kind of similar to our model that meet once a month and whatever, but I think it is really important to figure what your practice is. And for me, that's the social and interactive part of my practice, which is as important as the writing itself, because of the world we operate in. Theater is a collaborative, in-person art form. And so if you're not getting that, you're not really making the tools that you need to become a fully functional playwright, I would say.
And I'll have more on resources and
Does this answer
writing
your
groups
question, though,
as well.
I mean, getting people together and people that you trust and that you respect and working together, I think, is the first answer, aside from just plain writing.
Of course, there's some writers who are already, I can picture the comments like, there are plenty of writers who don't need to just write in their room, and that's fine. But I think also it feels like one question you're asking was like, what can be taught and what can't be taught? Right. And I think these two could answer better. Kate and Ilana can answer probably better than I can. But I read for places too and deal with a lot of writers. It's really hard to know, but the weird thing is I know it when I see it. And I know I know when it's not there. But don't ever let anybody tell you that you don't have it. Because actually the more important thing is if you want to do this, don't ask that question. Because if you're asking that question, you might as well just get out. Seriously, because there's always someone to tell you no, or someone to say you're not good enough. That's 95% of what you're going to hear. So if you're looking for that affirmation, it's going to have a hard time.
This is so true. I think in some ways you have to have the bravado and the ridiculous self-confidence that the story you're telling deserves to be told, regardless of what anybody says. Susan Laurie Parks, when she was in college, the theater department told her that what she was writing wasn't a play, that she could not put mounds of dirt on stage. She couldn't dig holes in the dirt on stage. Now, okay, let's leave aside Beckett for a second. Susan Laurie Parks was writing these proto plays that she was then mentored by the English department. And she ended up saying essentially, screw you, to the theater department, who was full of know-it-alls that said, no, this is not a play. And it turns out everything she was doing in those early plays is the hallmark of her aesthetic today. That over and over again we see in her work the metaphor of the digging the great hole of history over and over again, writing your history and putting it under a rock and digging. That appears across her work, and that is right in the beginning of her aesthetic. And so yeah, are we all Susan Laurie Parks? No. I wish. However, I think that if we can be confident about the value of the story we're trying to tell, that goes a long way towards conveying that thing I was talking about earlier about being centered in your voice.
And let me say something about sort of the approach. So we'll segue into, I think, James's question. If your idea is that I will perfect the play at home, and then send it out to these 2 or 3 theaters that I know and admire, and they'll send it to them and they'll choose it. That's what your thought process is. I think you're setting yourself for years of disappointment because we've established that Jackie's ratio of 15 submissions and 4 acceptances is really good. I've had because of talking with Patrick, he's all about numbers and marketing and keeping track of what you've sent out and what gets back. So last year I sent out 180 something applications of various sorts, and I got 18 or to 20 acceptances, etc. And that meant, I was rejected 160 times, but I don't know when sending it out if they're going to like it, but you have to do the numbers game in order to get traction until you're, at 5 layers above me.
And I think one quick thing to add about plays getting picked, you don't just have to write a good play. Because there are a lot of good plays out there that don't get produced. And there's this nice fallacy that's spread around by people that want us to write more things that is, if it's good enough, it'll be produced, it'll get up there. That is total bullshit. That is just not true. So plays get picked maybe because they're good. They also get picked because it fits in the season. It fits in because we have the right actors to cast this. We have enough money, or we already have 5 comedies and we need a serious play. Those are all the factors.
Or it's too like something that somebody produced 3 years ago in town.
Right, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So I think that's the hard thing of what we do, is that your quality is not the sole determinant of.
So
it's not even
subjective.
The primary determinant
That's
of
right.
what's going to choose whether your play is picked or not.
Yeah, the first episode of this season was Michael Bradford. He's a playwright and artistic director of Connecticut Repertory Theater. And so I asked him about what it looks like from their artistic director side, and that was the same answer. Like, playwrights don't know how much we agonize and have to think of all these logistics about what our season is like. And I still love this playwright. I didn't choose her play now, but as soon as we can, we will. But the playwright is just like, I haven't heard from Michael in 2 years. He
Also,
hates
you
me.
don't know what somebody could love your play and not be able to produce it, and is actually shopping your play around to other people. Hey, you don't know this writer, you should totally read their work, and you probably won't produce this play, but get to know this writer and then follow up on them. And that stuff happens behind the scenes in a space you will never know, and no one will ever tell you because it's too much pressure. I'm trying to get a rolling world premiere going of a play right now, which I'm not telling the playwright this because it's too much pressure.
Yeah.
In the meantime, I'm speaking to 6 to 10 artistic directors around the country, and I'm getting amazing feedback. They love the play. People love this play. They've read it before. They really want to do it, but it doesn't fit in that season. And there's a sort of a time frame about a rolling world premiere, and it can't be so I'm having all these individual negotiations on behalf of this writer. Who knows? Who really knows what's going to happen with that play, or whether we'll even produce it, even though I'm doing all this work? It's a mystery. So you really have to, I think, Pat, your advice is so spot on. You really have to divorce out the results of the playwriting game from your own sense of self.
If you don't mind if I add real quick too, I've noticed myself, the reason that I started sort of all of a sudden submitting is because I had submitted sporadically to things, and every once in a while it wouldn't get picked, and I would just maybe see something else. I didn't really follow up that much. And then one day over the summer, or at the beginning of the summer, I got an email from someone at a theater company where I had submitted to a festival for 10-minute plays. And he was kind enough to write to me and say, I want to let you know it didn't make the finals. We really liked it. It didn't make it, but we really enjoyed it. And we think that, it had value.
There were several years where a handwritten note from Kate Snodgrass saying we're this close to Boston Theater Marathon this year, but we love it. But that was the highlight of my year.
Absolutely. It made me so happy. It was the nicest rejection I've ever had. It was so kind. And that actually made me think to myself, oh, I should be doing more of this. And, I wish I had sort of had that on my own, but it took someone else kind of giving me that feedback. And that play was the one that I then revised and submitted and had some success with. So I would say, too, that we should remember as early career playwrights that we aren't always going to get that feedback. People aren't going to have the time. And so we need to assume, I think, oh, well, it just didn't fit. I like to just assume it didn't fit this time. Let's see if it needs revision or whatever. I'll deal with it on my own and just keep submitting it out rather than saying, oh, this is a piece of crap and no one's going to want it. Yeah. I think that's really important to just kind of keep that up.
Yeah. Let's segue, if you don't mind, to James's question about finding your tribe, because I think this is where we're sort of heading now. How do you find the people who will like your things? I know, James, your plays are very intense, as far as I can tell. So how do you find the people who will, like what you do and want to work with you, no matter what your style is?
This is only what I would do, because I don't know the right answer here, but I know there are theater companies that would gravitate to your work. You have to go online and you have to look through people's seasons and you have to ask people, the kinds of things that they produce and then connect to them. That's just a hell of a lot of work.
So you have your own theater company, right?
Yeah, which is actually just what you were saying. I know that feeling. We try to do new works as well. And a couple of years ago, we put out a call. We got a number of scripts, and there's that section of not going to do these. But then there's also that clump of like, oh, this is good, but we have to produce it for $500, and you have a shootout at the end of the show, and that's fine. So I absolutely get that, and I've been on the other side of the table for that.
So that's part of your people, right? Like your theater company is part of your people. I'm going to avoid using the term tribe because I think it has some political complexities to it. But I think we're asking like, who's your community, right? Like who are the folks who are simpatico to like what your approach is? I think Kate's advice is really great. And one way to kind of sort of take an action step, because I think sometimes the advice for everything is like, okay, go online and find the thing. It's like, oh gosh, how do I do that? It is the right advice and also like so hard to do. There used to be, people used to publish books that had all this stuff in it, and they don't do that anymore.
Right.
But I do think that NPX can be a really great resource. Do you have a profile on NPX?
I do have a profile on NPX.
Great. Do you have a group of folks that you read each other's plays and you write reader reports?
I do not.
Okay, so that's step one, I think. One of the great things on NPX is you can ask folks to read your plays, just friends, like other folks in the community, and to write a little report on your play on NPX. And as you build up those reports on your plays, you become visibly a playwright on NPX who's in community. And other folks will find their way.
Who writes Madness and Man.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That says, this is me. And then the people who are looking for that come to you.
That's right. So I think that's one thing to do. And I actually know there's a lot of playwrights who use the Facebook group Official Playwrights of Facebook, which is a kind of a bonkers place. It's kind of a bonkers place. You have to kind of be ready to go there. But
it's the Wild West.
Yeah. One of the things that has emerged out of that Facebook group, which I think is super positive, is there's a group of people who have agreed, they sort of sign up with one another. They say, okay, I'm going to read 5 plays this month, and so people put their names in of like a pool of like, I want to get my play read this month, and then so everybody sort of throws in how many they'll do, and they kind of like divvy them out, and folks read and report. Now you can't say, oh, only report on my play if it's good, right?
But you can only report on plays you like. The reports have to be positive.
That's right.
So
That's right.
You will only report on it if it's good.
That's right.
By necessity.
So, but that doesn't mean that everybody who decides to read and report on your play is going to actually write a report, because they might not feel that they can support that play, which is fair and good. But that's another way to be in community, because then it doesn't just have to be with people who are here physically. It can be a huge wider net that you cast out. But I also think this connects to, Jackie, to your question a few minutes ago when you were thinking about like a writer's group, and you thought, okay, well, I have asked folks and they seem game, but like then what happens?
Yeah.
I think these might actually be kind of the same question. Here's my hot self-producing tip. People like to be involved in stuff. They like it better if it feels like they sort of surmounted a hurdle to be involved. If it's too simple to be involved in stuff, people can walk away too easily. If you want to start a writing group, put together a very simple Google form application and send it out and say, I want to put together a writing group of 6 to 8 writers, or however many you think is good. Maybe you can fit in your living room, right? and like, you can set the parameters. I want a potluck playwriting group where once a month we'll get together and everybody brings a food, and please make sure some of it's vegan and whatever. And on your Google form, you have people fill out whatever information you think is applicable.
I love that.
And then you choose a group of people and you launch a playwrights group. That's all you have to do, right? Like in some ways, there's no barrier for cost. It's just, do people want to commit enough to say, I'm putting an application, I'm going to put effort in to writing an application, and I will agree to these pre-selected dates.
I wanted to add, so there, in terms of finding material and where to submit to, and then choosing which are the right ones to submit, are obviously 2 different questions, right? So where do you find that wealth of information? So I started this group, the Playwright Submission Binge group online that has, I don't know, we're up to like 1,200 writers now around the world. It's getting big. So that group focuses solely on marketing. So it's a little different from Playwright's Facebook group. This is a Yahoo group, get it in your mailbox. But what's cool about it is we take 2 months a year, we do a binge, and we take up the challenge of sending out a play a day every day for 30 days. And what's cool about it is that you then share to the group. You're building some accountability for yourself. You write back to the group, you say, today I sent this script to this theater and this is why. What's great about it is it ends up being a lot of sharing information, even though there's a lot of people on that list who are just lurking, like they're just sucking up the information. And we have some people who are actually the opposite, that just share there's one, Martha Patterson, who lives in Boston. I hope you're listening, Martha, who just sucks up every op she can find and puts it on our list, which is awesome. But so you join that list, costs you nothing, and it's just free information coming across the transom for you. But the cool thing is it's also a community. So if you take advantage of the actual 2 binges a year, you build this sense of habit for yourself of sending out stuff. And even if you just did it twice a year, a lot of times my schedule's really busy, so I don't have the time maybe to send stuff out, but I still send out, I try to do it for those 2 months. And then, I send like 160, 150 a year. But those months, I'm making time. I say marketing counts this month. It doesn't have to be all year, but for that month, like I'm going to spend an hour a day and send out some 10-minute plays or something like that. And so that's very helpful. But it also, because there's an online community, you can kind of suss out a little bit.
Find the people that gravitate, that you gravitate to. Mm-hmm. And then...
and you may be able to say, I'm looking for something like this, or you'll see opportunities come across. But I think kind of what Kate said is the nice thing is that in terms of evaluating things is that we have the internet now, where we used to have to kind of comb through magazines and guidebooks and stuff like that, and you wouldn't really do it because you couldn't find the places. But now it's really easy. And the thing that I think too many people do is they just submit to everything. And then that's the worst thing you can do, because it gobs up the system for everybody and it gets you nothing. Because if you send out 500 submissions, but 400 of them are to exactly the wrong place, you might as well just send out 100 and not wasted your time on the other 400. So I think it is really important, but it's easy to see from a website. I would say if I looked at your website, I would know instantly, is this the right kind of work for mine or not? And sometimes it's discouraging. Like I write multiracial casts almost all the time. So I'll look, and I don't know what New York and Chicago like to post their whole ensemble list. And it's all white people. Like, okay, well, they're not actually going to do my play. Even though they say they might, they're not gonna. So I'm not going to submit to them. Or if they did Moon Over Buffalo and Sound of Music, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with those plays, but it may not be what my aesthetic is. It's really easy to say. And it's much easier to look at their season than to judge their mission statement. Because their mission statement's going to say, we're interested in dynamic new plays that are changing the way theater is. And you're like, oh, well, they did Neil Simon, Barefoot in the Park. And so those things are at odds, but the season tells you what they really do.
That's where their money is.
Yeah.
Right? Like the season tells you everything.
And so that's what you want to know.
Companies that say we're dedicated to new work in the mission statements, and then you look at the actual season and it's all established works. And it's kind of mind-boggling.
So believe what they're telling you when they show you. Not what they tell you, believe what they show you.
Also, who are the writers that write like the way you write? Figure out who are the more established writers who you feel some affinity towards, that share some aesthetic with you, and look at where they're getting developed and produced.
Exactly. If you say, well, I write like Christopher Grang. Yeah. Who, and then that's nice and easy to Google that, to see who in the professional theater did Christopher Grang in the last 2 years. And
does new work.
Yeah, and does new work. But that's really the best advice, is figure out who's like you but not quite you. What's the play that would remind people of you but isn't exactly the same?
I want to maybe pull on a little thread of this question that I think is actually tricky and slightly depressing. I apologize.
Great.
Great. Because here's the real thing about the theater, and Pat alluded to this earlier, which is that the theater is a profession of relationships. So you can binge and you can send out hundreds of plays a year, but if you aren't building relationships with folks who are doing the work in the theater in the places that you hope to be, then those submissions, and I have some challenge around the word submission, because it has some connotations to me of sort of I submit myself to your judgment, right? Which I think can be it's hard to deal with. Yeah. But if you can identify where the work is that is like the work you want to do, the best thing you can do, aside from sending your plays to those places, is build a relationship with those people. And that goes beyond asking them to read a play of yours. You build relationship by going to them, by, hopefully they're near you, right? Or you can build a relationship with them online in some way. Doesn't work for everything, right? You're not going to build a relationship with the Goodman from sitting in Boston unless you're going to Chicago. But you can build a relationship. You can build a relationship with Charles at the Huntington, right? You can show up to the events that Charles moderates, the post shows. You can show up to the places where he's doing things for Stage Source or anything else that he's doing, like the new play festivals that he runs. And you can build relationship with him, not because you want to exploit a relationship for your gain, but if you actually sincerely want to be in relationship to people, they will want to be in relationship to you. I can't tell you how many playwrights we've worked with because they started coming to our shows and stuck around afterwards and came to our events. I'm like, hung out and had conversations, and we're like, oh, we're each other's people. Let's see what that adds up to. And maybe a year or 2 years later, we're suddenly working with that person in a deeper way. So I think that's the hard thing about the theater, because it's really hard to do.
Because the real truth of our business is people don't produce plays they like. People produce plays by people they like, in general. It's not entirely true, but it's part of that building a relationship. I'll give you an example. How I got a production from Rough and Tumble, which was some years back. They're not around anymore. But they're a company that did gibberish plays and kind of really unusual, really physical plays. They're delightful. Then they all had babies, and they're living their lives. Hi, guys. I really was attracted to their work. And so I went to go see the play. And then I stayed after, and I introduced myself to Dan, the artistic director, and said, hey, this is really great. Put me on your mailing list. And then I went back again. And it took a couple years. I introduced myself as a playwright right away, but then, I might have shown him something, and we workshopped a play, and it wasn't something they were going to do, and then came up with another play. But it was probably like a 2-3 year process at least of me really loving their work, and that was something I liked to do. And I think if you don't have somebody around you whose work you love, it's going to be hard to find a place for your work. And then I think for when you're trying to find places outside of where you are, I used to advise people, like, pick a city. Like, where's the city you want to go to? And find the company that's there whose work you think you're gravitated to, and either read about it a lot or find a way to see it or comment on it and do that. And also the advantage of submitting or applying to certain development workshops is actually, it's not so much just to develop your work. It's to meet people who are there, who have been chosen by people who are looking for a certain kind of work. And then when you're picked in that group, now you have friends that you're going to meet and whose aesthetic might be similar to yours. That relationship is key.
Let's move on to the last of the big questions, the plight of the 10-minute play specialist. How does one become the next David Ives? Kate, now you know a little something about 10-minute plays.
Okay, I just asked, we have to give our dean a list of awards and things that are alums and current students. I just got a long list from one of our current students, and most everything on her list. This is Houston, Chicago, Louisville, Los Angeles. She's got a list of 10-minute plays that are being produced in all of those cities. There are so many contests. You must have sent them out there. There's so many of them out there. You have to do that. And then you put it on your resume as, production. And it was. One of our other colleagues, she used to actually go to these cities and see them. I don't know how she managed it, but and make a connection with that theater company. There's also a number of books of 10-minute plays. Yes. I mean, we used to have an anthology for the Boston Theater Marathon, but there's one by Smith and Krause. There's another one by Applause Books. They are out there, and you need to find out who that editor is, and either have someone who knows the play, if it's produced by a theater company, have them send it to that editor, or you send it and say it was produced at blah, 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 with this cast, and it adds up. Okay. They're out there. One acts are a little bit more difficult, but those books are being published too. There are fewer competitions because you can't get as many one acts into an evening of theater. But I love one acts, and I stand behind them.
Me too.
So I would say, in terms of kind of the life cycle of a 10-minute play, I think it's a good question. It depends a lot on what the intended audience is for that. Because ultimately, for most plays, at the end of your arc, you want it to be published. And you want to publish it after it's kind of had the peak of what it's going to hit theater-wise before it's hitting out in the publisher realm. Kate's exactly right that there's a ton of new play 10-minute festivals out there, more than you realize. And so there's not just 5 or 6. Like, I have some plays that have been done by on the 20.
Yeah.
Easily. And I'm still sending them out.
Right.
So, and I've actually made the mistake sometimes of publishing a little too soon, where I'm just like, I'm sick of sending it out. I don't have any traction for it. And sometimes those will go sit in the publisher, and then it gets done a couple times a year or whatever. And it just depends a lot. But there are publishers who specialize in the educational market. So, and those, there are gradations within that too. So like Pioneer tends to work a little younger, and then Brooklyn Hoyer, 2 separate catalogs but owned by the same company. They're still the young market, but they head into high school and into college. And then PlayScript is hitting they make most of their money from high school still, but they still are hitting the college and professional market. And then there's the larger publishers. All of them have very distinct sweet spots for what they're looking for in material. So you have to kind of honestly assess where yours fits. You want to get as many productions for it as possible before you start sending it out. Mm-hmm. Some of those markets open and close depending on kind of who's in charge right now. Like right now, PlayScripts is pretty closed. Samuel French, the way to access that is through their Off-Broadway festival. Brooklyn Hoyer, you can go right in through the door. And Brooklyn's a little easier. I know the editor there. Pioneer, they have competition, but the younger markets are pretty open generally. But you can make, I have 30 or 40 10-minute plays that are published, and it doesn't pay me $1 zillion a year, but I probably make $600-700 a year just from plays that I wrote 10 years ago or 20 years ago. So the nice thing is there's some money there, and it's cool when they get done. You just realize, like, oh, here's a play I wrote, my very first play in 1987, and it still gets done now by some high school somewhere. And it's cool, and that part's really rewarding, but that's really the trajectory you're looking at, and there's an end point for it. Like I said, you don't want to tie it up too early, because sometimes there's more stuff that can happen with it. But at some point you might say, yeah, I've had enough with this. Put it out there.
Also, note that NPX has a large and growing cohort of academic memberships. So we're seeing more and more theater departments at colleges have memberships to NPX, because there was a newly launched kind of like tier for that, which means that if a school has a membership, their students can get on NPX and search for plays, and a lot of students will produce 10-minute plays. Because it's something they can either do in a class, or that's an easy thing to self-produce with whatever resources are there. And so if you can be smart about how you tag your 10-minute plays and think about which ones appeal to folks who are in the school zones, right, younger up to college, I think that is actually a really great use of a 10-minute play, and thinking about where NPX can be a sort of a platform for amplifying that. I will also note that I think because 10-minute plays are quicker, mostly I think, quicker to write, sometimes not always, quicker to write than a full length, and are a little bit less emotionally, psychologically, and labor intensive for the writer, it can get really attractive to spend a lot of time writing 10-minute plays, right? Especially because there's so many more places to send them that feel like possibilities. Yeah. And so you can find yourself as a writer, as somebody who has written 20, 30 10-minute plays without a full length to your name, right? And then if you want to talk to a theater company who might want to be in relationship to you because you're doing that work, you're building relationship, right? You're showing up to stuff, you're making connections, and the literary manager says, or the artistic director says, hey, can you send me a full length? And you say, look, I have about 40 10-minute plays I can send you.
Can I send you my collection of 10 minutes?
Yes, exactly. They don't want to read that because actually what most theaters are looking for is, do you have durational storytelling? And I think the 10-minute form is its own form. It's not like practice for writing full-length plays, right? Which I think sometimes people misperceive it as. It's its own specific form with its own challenges, and you can get excellent at it. But I recommend that playwrights, unless that's your whole jam and that's what you want to do, and like that's amazing, and if that's your thing, then do that and go with God. But I think that playwrights, I encourage playwrights to work back and forth between the 10-minute form to like work out some ideas and get the juices going, and then can you do the durational storytelling of a full length, which I think is a harder and less rewarding thing in the immediate place.
Yeah, and I do have, I'm working on some, and it's just, that to me seems more intuitive as far as what the process might be. And that's really why I like 10-minute plays, and I even have one that I've thought about expanding into a longer play. But yeah, that's great advice. I mean, certainly to
always think about that. They're a great exercise in the classroom. Yeah. I mean, can you write the crisis point? 10 minutes, right there. And if you can do that, then use that. I love that you have one already that you say, I'd like to build on. Because, and this is a good for you too, David, because you can teach yourself some of the aspects of playwriting, how to get to that crisis point, how to get exposition in. I mean, it's a really great teaching tool for young writers in particular.
And great 10-minute plays are so great.
Oh my God.
They're so great.
Yeah.
And
they're great for that.
And they are a good calling card for starting relationship with companies. I mean, it's definitely happened for me. I've had short plays get me to Korea. So there's good things about writing them, and you can get paid some places, and it's always good to when the check comes in the mail, it feels really good. And so like there's 10 by 10 out at Barrington Stage Company is a great festival, and what's cool about it is that it's a full equity production. Like you go out there, and these are amazing actors. The director I had is directed on Broadway. That is not how they usually go, but it's worth knowing, like, okay, so these are ones I want to make sure that I have the right thing for that. So like there's City Theater in Miami produces at a very high level and pays you accordingly. Phoenix Theater in Indianapolis has a great holiday show, and the pay is a couple $100. And people say, "Oh, you focus on money too much," but I got to pay my bills.
Get paid.
And again, it's like a full real production, and there's a couple other places, so it's also worth kind of paying attention. Like if you're in a group like the Binge or whatever, and find like, which are the festivals that really do a great job at and making sure those are high on your list.
But as you say, you're meeting somebody who's directing on Broadway, these wonderful actors, and they love your 10-minute play. So they're going to ask you exactly what I want to say.
What else have you got?
Yeah. What else have you got? And you've got to have it. You've got to.
Of the people here, I think Jackie would benefit most from taking part of the tools like New Play Exchange and Playwright Binge and things like that. And we'll definitely set you up with some of that.
That'd be great.
So I think that we should bring this part 1 of the conversation to a close. Part 2 will be uploaded next month. To everyone listening, support new plays and support local playwrights.
This was part 1 of the Early Career Playwright Special with David Fristrom, Jackie Martin, James Wilkinson, and Sharisse Zeeronian. You can find David, Jackie, and James on New Play Exchange. David's site is davidfristromplaywright.com, and James's site is rabbitreviewsboston.com. Play excerpts were read by Rachel Bellman, Melissa Bergstrom, Christina Chan, Austin Davis, and Greg Hovanessian. Follow us on Twitter at BossPodPlay and on Facebook. Please rate us on iTunes or your podcast player of choice. You can support us on Patreon at BossPodPlay. Our theme was composed by Thomas Deus, thomasdeusmusic.com. Additional music by bensound.com. Other than yourself, do you know of a Boston area playwright who you'd like to be featured on the show? Let us know at bosspodplay@gmail.com.